I now welcome our next witness, and thank you for attending today. I'm going to start by asking you to please state your name, position, title, and swear either an oath or an affirmation, please.
Thank you. My name is Galea. I'm independent biostatistician, and I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the whole truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you. And did you have an opening statement that you'd like to begin with?
Yes, I do, because I'm really nervous, and after that now I'm really scared, but that's okay. So I'm just going to read these 2 pages, if that's okay, so I can try and get my confidence up.
100%.
I normally sit behind a computer, so coming out here in front of people is a little daunting. I'm a full-time biostatistician and PhD candidate. I've been a statistician for over 25 years. I've analysed all forms of data ranging from military to biological, educational and medical. I specialise in teaching, lecturing and scrutinising complex time-based data and examining trends over time. I've published over 60 peer-reviewed papers, including my master's dissertation, which was based on trends over time, as are the documents that I've reported on in my submission to this inquiry. My submission is far more detailed than this introduction can ever be, but I thank the panel for the opportunity to highlight just a few specific examples from it prior to questioning. I started looking into the methodology, distance sampling, applied by Stuart Cairns from Cairns Consulting in December 2019, long before COVID began, which feels like a lifetime ago sitting here. And that was for counting kangaroos. The very same methodology used to count kangaroos is used to count the wild horses in the Kosciuszko National Park. After 4 years of looking at this data, I have appears as a witness at the New South Wales Parliamentary Inquiry into the health and wellbeing of macropods, where much of what I will go through today was also spoken about in that inquiry. Minister Sharp was in that inquiry, and I quote from Hansard Records that she stated, "The counting methodology is argued. It does not matter what sort of animal it is a significant issue." B, I appeared as a witness in the federal inquiry into the management of wild horses. That was at home from my computer and far less nerve-wracking than today. And C, I've done interviews and spoken at functions. I've tried to show the fundamental flaws in the methodology applied by Stuart Cairns and the National Parks and Wildlife Service. The first report I investigated for the wild horses was the analysis of the aerial surveys conducted in April and May 2014 and 2019. This report received great criticism from the University of St Andrews, the very company who designed the software that Stuart Cairns uses. The 3 key points that they argued as to what the problems were: the high population growth rate exceeds the published maximum growth rate for horses. If you do the calculations, mares can have 7 foals a year in Kosciuszko. The university argued that the estimation of population trends over time is difficult based on this methodology. And finally, the biggest one for me is that the university stated there should be no population estimate for areas not surveyed. The assumptions behind this modelling is that the areas where the helicopter does not fly, there are no horses. That is stated by the University of St Andrews, not myself. Let me give you a maths example, because that's where I work best. In 2014 and 2019, the New South Wales Park surveyed over 70% of the park and claimed to see 1,748 horses. But after this distance sampling method was applied by Stuart Cairns, that was estimated to be anywhere between 14 and 23,500 over the whole park. There are 4 key assumptions. As statisticians, we have rules in modelling that we have to follow. So if I want to run a modelling to project anything, there's rules and assumptions I have to follow. There's 4 key ones for this modelling that Stuart Cairns has to follow. Firstly, 100% of all horses are seen. That is not possible. Secondly, the horses or animals that you are counting using distance sampling cannot move and cannot move in groups. Now, horses run and run in herds. And horses are randomly spread equally across the park. So if you divide the park up into grids, you put your horses equally randomly spaced. Obviously, we've heard they run in groups and herds. They're not equally spaced. And finally, the key assumption that Stuart Cairns and National Parks state to do any reliable modelling, they are their words, not mine again, you need to see a minimum of 60 to 80 clusters of horses. So to give you an example, in 2014, they saw 10 horses. Not clusters, 10. Now that's a lot less than 60. A cluster is more than 1, by the way. In 2019, they saw 5 horses, not 60. So then they added the 2 years together. So they added 2014 to 2019, got 15 individual horses, not 60 clusters, and then modelled. That's fundamentally flawed. You can't project time trends with one time point by adding them together. These fundamental assumptions that have failed make any population estimates completely and utterly unreliable. This work, contrary to what Stuart Cairns or National Parks will say, has never been independently, academically peer-reviewed by a non-government agency or a company who has not been financially interested in the work. There's never been any imagery provided to verify any of the counting. They have the raw numbers, but they don't publish them. And apparently as of October this year, you have the same probability of seeing a horse under the trees as you do in open terrain. I find that hard to believe. I have 2 recommendations to the inquiry today. Firstly, that an independent investigation into the current counting methodology, the mathematical and statistical modelling of all population trends over time be urgently undertaken. A moratorium is needed to halt trapping and shooting of wild horses until this can be done. And second, that new and globally applied methodologies of population counting by way of imagery be immediately adopted. An independent recount must be undertaken independent of national parks, government and Cairns. Using imagery, it will provide permanent records of populations and allow for correct, mathematically accurate observations to be made over time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your statement and thank you for your time today. And I understand you're very nervous, so please...
Sorry.
No. Take a moment if you need it. You've got some water, but also feel free to take any questions on notice as well if you don't feel comfortable answering it at the time.
Thank you.
I'm just going to start with a couple of questions myself. I know you met with the New South Wales government and asked them to implement a number of changes to the count methodology. And my understanding is that those changes that you asked for didn't happen. Can you talk us through some of the changes that you recommended, why you recommended them, and what that means for the second count that was done without those changes?
Sure, absolutely. We actually didn't recommend that many changes. What we wanted to do was each year the National Parks and Wildlife Service do their annual head counts, flying the helicopters on their survey pattern. We asked that exact head count be repeated. We didn't want it changed. We didn't want the helicopter changed. We don't want anything. We wanted to fly the exact same flight path that national parks do every year. We wanted the same counters. We wanted the same pilot, exactly the same. We just asked that on the left-hand front side of the helicopter that an independent photographer was present in that helicopter. This independent photographer had estimated that he could obtain 7,000 to 8,000 individual photos clearly identifying every single animal. Seen over 2 consecutive days. So if we flew day 1, normally National Park fly 1 day, we asked, fly the flight 2 days and have a photographer. We wanted to replicate basically what they're doing in Victoria. Victoria Parks use mark and re-site. So they put a photographer up in the plane. They also have video image, but they take photos of every single animal. They identify them by their unique markings. And we agreed that we would give all imagery to everybody, media, government, National Park, anybody that wanted, everything that we got would be made public. After those 2 flights were done, we would sit down at a round table, work through the numbers, have a look at the horses and negotiate what would go from there. So I don't believe we asked for a lot of changes, just a photographer in that plane, in a helicopter.
And what was the reason that you were given for those changes to be rejected?
So I believe that the photographer couldn't fly in a helicopter that had an open door. When I asked for the Markery site to be used, Atticus Fleming said that he wasn't aware that it was being used in Australia, contrary to the fact it is being used in Victoria, and they're using it very well. That was what was given to me. Sorry.
And so, given that they did the most recent recount in the normal method, does that mean that in your professional opinion, the data that we're given, is that reliable?
100% not. No, it's not. And as I can go through the modelling assumptions, like I said to you, that the assumptions have failed clearly by the methodology. But I must reiterate, please, that this is the University of St Andrews who criticise this work as well, who say that the methodology that they are used is difficult to work on time trends. They won't provide any imagery of what they saw. Now they won't even provide us the raw numbers of horses that they saw. And now I cannot understand we work on probability of detection for seeing an animal. Obviously the higher the better. They're looking at around 40%. And then they come up with an average of 57% that the same in the open terrain as a treat area, but you're only 60, 100 metres off the ground. I don't understand how the probability of detection can be assumed to be the same in totally different vegetation. There's thousands of publications arguing against that assumption. So no, I think it's very concerning. And we don't even have the raw numbers anyway for what they saw. And
are you surprised that the counting methodology in Victoria that's used in Victoria was rejected in New South Wales?
Yeah, I was very surprised. It's gold standard. Markery site is used across the globe. And I may point out also the Victoria Parks has used thermal imagery. We felt that the best compromise was having the photographer for Marquee's site. We even proposed we gave them the identification charts for horses, blaze, stars, stripes, everything, colours exactly as Victoria Parks, but no, it's rejected.
The October 2023 survey stated that there was a 95% confidence interval. The population's between 12,934 and 22,536. You've raised concerns about this extremely wide confidence interval.
That's correct.
Can you explain, sort of in layman terms, for the committee's benefit, like what the concerns are in regards to having such a large confidence interval, and is that kind of normal in these kind of situations, or what sort of confidence interval would you look at if you're trying to find a 95%
Sure.
concept?
Excellent. And I mean, even when I'm lecturing this, I spend a whole 2-hour lecture on confidence intervals when I'm teaching stats. It's not an easy thing to get. In summary, what you're looking at, if you're going to do 95% confidence intervals, means that if you were to do exactly the same survey 100 times, you could be 95% certain that that population estimate that you got lands between that confidence interval. If you were to do that survey 100 times exactly the same way, you'd be 95% certain that it would. Now, a confidence interval wider than 10% is a little concerning. We'd want to know why is the width so wide. Now, to give you an example, in 2022, the confidence interval was 46%. Now, they flew further in 2023. We're supposed to be refining methodology, but the confidence interval went even wider to 55%. So, in effect, we cannot be certain at all that the true population lies anywhere near that. But again, we don't have the raw numbers. We have no evidence to back anything up. So it's a very extremely concerning. It'd be very hard to publish in peer review academic with a 55% confidence interval.
Thank you. The reason really for aerial shooting, and there's obviously quite a big discussion about the humaneness of aerial shooting and the welfare impact of aerial shooting, but generally what's given is we've got these significant numbers of animals in the park, which is up to over 22,000 horses as a justification for aerial shooting. Are you suggesting that we don't actually know how many horses there are in the park, so therefore until we have the correct data as to how many horses there are, we can't decide on any kind of management, or even if management's necessary?
Yeah, look, that's correct. And as the University of St Andrews said, in 2014-2019, they saw 1,748 horses in 2019. They quote, "There should be no population estimation for areas not surveyed," as the assumption is that the population areas where the helicopter doesn't fly is zero. So we should be going on the fact that there's 1,748 horses in that park, obtaining imagery across as much area as physically possible, whether by drones, fixed wing, any, to obtain that and verify the count. But that count must be independent, and independent of myself. Everybody, it must be completely independent retaken until we have that valid number.
And you mentioned Dr. Cairns.
Yes.
Do you feel comfortable with his qualifications to be able to undertake that work?
I'm not sure I'm at liberty to question his qualifications, Stuart Cairns. I question his methodology.
Okay, so you're questioning the methodology
Correct.
that's used.
Yep. And it's the same. I've been looking at it for 4 years. It's the same for kangaroos. So his population estimates, mares can have 7 foals, kangaroos can have 24 joeys a year by these distance sampling methodologies. So incredible population estimates they come up with.
The Honourable Wes Fangs seeking the call.
Thank you. Ms. Galea, your testimony this afternoon is explosive, absolutely explosive. And I think that what it's doing is actually providing some context as to the earlier evidence we heard today from particularly the government in relation to why it is that they are not allowing the recording of the conduct of the aerial shooting.
Does the Honourable Wes Fang have a question coming from
to
that?
my question.
Then I suggest you come to the question.
It's explosive because it gives context to the evidence that we heard today. Are you able to indicate what recording methods have national parks used in relation to their surveys of a visual nature?
In Victoria or New South Wales?
In New South Wales.
We have no imagery for New South Wales. I know they have they've done a trial comparing 3 different methodologies, but that they didn't undertake any of that. Can I point out, in the response document that was given to me as to why they rejected our recount, they said that when the population was significantly reduced, they would undertake mark recite. So I can't understand why they won't undertake mark recite now when the numbers can't be verified or there's no imagery to support the numbers anyway.
Okay, so you've sought to have evidence recorded
Yep.
from the survey,
Yep.
and that has been denied by National Parks and Wildlife.
As far as I understand, it's them that make the decision. I'm not sure it's them or Labor government. I don't understand, sorry.
Okay, and you have provided them the clear examples of
Yes.
how the methodology is
Yep.
not correct, and how they can have further confidence in the numbers by making small changes.
That's correct. I provided them the document from Victoria Parks of what they're using. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Are you able at all to model what you expect the numbers might be, given the raw data that Mr. Cairns has used to provide his estimated figure?
Well, I guess that comes down to the assumptions that if he didn't see 60 to 80 clusters, you cannot undertake any reliable modelling. He should not be doing it.
Okay. So is there any method at all that exists that the data set, that the raw data
Yep.
that exists can be used at all to model the number of horses in the park?
So if we flew over the 2 consecutive days like we proposed using mark recite, we used, as CSIRO have used, it's called like a Lincoln estimator, a Lincoln Peterson estimator. It's CSIRO published in 2008. And we use that estimator. So you fly the first day, you take images, look at all the horses, fly the second day, exactly the same flight path, and you compare how many horses you saw on both the same days and how many you missed on either day. And then you use an estimator to work out for that error over the 2 consecutive days. That is CSIRO published methodology, yep.
But what I guess I'm asking is that given the raw data that you've seen that's being used at the moment to provide the 95% figure of between 12,000 to 22,000, I think it is?
I don't have that raw data. They won't publish
Okay.
it.
So they won't provide the
No,
raw data?
we don't have it.
Okay.
Sorry.
On the data...
If I didn't make that clear.
No. You might have. I'm just trying to, I guess, tease out what's available and what we can actually cross-determine from the evidence that's provided to us.
Yep.
So the raw data is not being provided, so you're not able to make
No,
any
that's
assumptions on that.
correct. Yep.
On the data that is published, the data that's used to give you some evidence as to how they established the 12,000 to 22,000 figure,
Yep.
are you able to use that data at all to extrapolate a more accurate figure?
No, we're not provided sufficient information to undertake it with any statistical integrity at all.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Is it possible at all that you think that... Is it possible at all that you think that this... the fact that they won't allow cameras to record the horses while they're culling or while they're doing the surveys, the fact that they won't release the raw data sets, the fact that the data that is published isn't able to be used to cross-check the numbers, is it perhaps a deliberate strategy by National Parks and Wildlife to muddy the waters so that they can claim that there are potentially more horses in the park than would normally exist?
I guess from where I can stand as publishing in peer review academic literature, if I wanted to publish a document of this nature, I would have to justify a very, very good reason to the journal why I wouldn't provide my database.
And so who is cross-checking this? We keep getting told that this is peer-reviewed and that it's being, I guess, endorsed by other entities. Who is providing that endorsement to National Parks and Wildlife?
So we've been told ourselves as well that it's a Queensland government agency and the CSIRO have done this. Both are not independent of the government and they're not academic literature. So we question why, and this was put to record in the Macropod inquiry. Why has this not been peer-reviewed independent academic literature? And
I've got one more question, and it relates to other means of surveys. And obviously, you've spoken about the other methods of surveys, which can be done with the helicopter and the visual method.
Yes.
But we know recently there's been, I guess, advances in things like drone technology.
Correct.
temperature, thermal imaging.
Thermal imagery, RGB imagery, yep.
Yep. Is there perhaps a better way, other than flight paths and helicopters, that could potentially capture
Yes.
the number of horses in the park? Could you provide us a little bit of insight into that?
Yeah, look, I mean, certainly, I mean, there's three different main ways. There's currently drones looking over the Great Barrier Reef that have a flight path time of 12 hours, which would not intervene with any animal horse path at all whatsoever. Those drones are producing incredible results. We've also, there's RGB imagery, where you think that's like taking the images together and it forms a colour image like a recipe as the RGB images come together to present a full colour picture of the horse. And thermal imagery, which is, obviously also being used by Vic Parks and is incredibly useful. And this is the methodology that we need to be using, thermal imagery, RGB. We can't assume that counting a horse in the open terrain under trees is different. We need thermal imagery to look through those trees.
The Minister said today that technology wasn't mature enough to be used. Do you have any evidence that might indicate otherwise?
Yes, I could. I could provide, I don't have them with me, but I could certainly provide you with academic literature saying that thermal imagery is definitely being used to count wild horses, yes.
Thank you very much.
Miss Sue Higginson?
Thank you. Thank you for your evidence. What makes you assume that any errors in the count leads to the overestimate and not an underestimate?
Not an underestimate.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in the fact that they haven't seen the minimal amount of horses to do any modelling. So if they needed to see a minimum of 60 clusters, so let's say they needed to see 120 horses minimum per location. If we have a look in the 2014 document, in all of North Kosciuszko, open terrain, medium terrain, Bargo, Biadbo and Snowy, they didn't see. They're not seeing enough horses to do the modelling.
But your fundamental premise is that the methodology is flawed. How can you then make the assumption that it's an overestimate and not an underestimate, particularly based on the fact that my understanding of what you were saying is Cairns says, well, where you can't see them, you don't count.
Well, no, that's the University of St Andrews said that Cairns should not be doing that.
And that's, so my understanding in his 2019 report,
yes,
that's actually what the whole extrapolation of the parts that you've taken, he actually does say that the assumption that he basically says that where you don't see, then you can't count. Like that's literally what he makes that assumption.
He makes that assumption and then still estimates across the entire park.
So then why do you, I'm still not clear on why you say then that flaw would not therefore lead to an underestimation, or could it? Could it have led to an underestimation?
Well, the modelling shouldn't have been undertaken in the first place. We should be using those raw actual count numbers of what's there.
I accept that's your premise, but it could therefore, given it's so flawed, it could therefore lead either way, essentially.
Without imagery, we'd have no way of backing it up, but they won't let us take
so
imagery.
It could lead either way, ultimately, because we don't have that, is what you're saying.
We have no evidence to support their count.
And so I think, based on, so your main observation is about the clusters, and that the clusters is below the recommended number of 60 to 80. I think that's your evidence.
Yes, Stuart Cairns states that to do any reliable modelling. That's the minimum to see, yeah.
And so then do you accept that this is only relevant to the 2014 and 2019 counts, and it's not true for the 2020, 21 and 22 counts?
I know that's his account for across all his counting for distance sampling.
But so there were 301 in 2020, there were 458 in 2021 and 419 in 2022.
That's collective. So, and this is another, can I just draw your attention to another concern by the University of St Andrews? The University of St Andrews clearly states that they should not be grouping the areas together when we model. They are four distinct parts, or when they model, sorry, they're four distinct locations and they should be modelled separately. Stuart Cairns applies a global detection function. What should happen, according to the University of St Andrews, is each location needs to see that minimum number of 60 to 80 clusters in order to do the modelling. And
But that was the case in the 2020, 21, 2022 reports.
Not in each location. Each individual location must see a minimum of 60 to 80 clusters in each block in open terrain and medium terrain. Because remember,
so you're saying that wasn't the case in those three reports?
Not across every single open and medium terrain in all locations. Each one needs to meet that minimum requirement and then should be modelled individually, because if you've got one area that doesn't meet that minimum requirement and you've got another area that does, you can't just group them together and then go, well, I'll run the modelling that way. Each section must meet that minimum requirement.
So can I ask from a, sorry, just to clarify from a layman's perspective, if you're doing the count, you're going out and you're trying to find that 60 to 80 clusters. So if they're doing the count and they're not seeing that, it's because they couldn't find them, or if they just got to like the 10 or the whatever and gone, that's it, we're off home. Like, why?
They flew their transect length, what they set. So if the transect length is set at 720 kilometres and they fly that path, and that's the number of horses they saw. But you have to remember that when they're looking out on their pole and they've got their 150 metre sight length from the helicopter, a change of elevation in the helicopter of 10 metres can make a massive difference in your sight length from that chopper. And without imagery which is set, so exact reading from an imagery, you can look at the error as anywhere up to 20 to 50% human error as the helicopter goes up and down, let alone as the person tilts their head. So we have nothing to verify what they're doing.
So they're sitting in the, sorry, again, I know this sounds very basic, just to understand. So they're actually sitting in there and they're writing, they're going, okay, there's one. Is that what they're doing?
They record as well what they do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so do you, so with my understanding about the methodologies and the changes that will be made is based on the size of the area and also the repeatability of what we have done. So my understanding is the government has suggested it will do recite methods as the population decreases in size. Is that a fair management approach? Is that something that sounds reasonable to you, that given where we are now, the compelling and legal requirement, ethical, moral, to reduce the population, and also this commitment to improving how we undertake population estimates?
I think until it can be verified, if they saw 1,748 university states, they shouldn't be doing any estimation where they don't fly. There shouldn't be anything done until we have the recount, an imagery recount done.
And do you mind if I just ask, for the purpose of this inquiry, have you ever been published in any ecological work or any journals, or have you got any ecological expertise?
No, my expertise is all in trends over time, varies from everything from humans to weapons to movement of all different things I've published in, but no, not in specific species. I've only looked into kangaroos and horses in this distance sampling population trends.
And so with that though, is it fair to say then a lot of the work that you have done would be related to
trends over time? Yes, that's correct.
And numbers where you can actually count the actual thing that you're taking an analysis about, whether it be patients in medical science, that sort of thing?
No, obviously with flight paths of weapons, we obviously use estimation as well. We can't test every single weapon, no, so we've used,
Thank you. And what's your PhD study in?
My PhD study's in a trend over time as well.
Relating to?
Cognitive science I'm in the field of now. So I've been in many fields as I take my trends over time work. So I'm looking at patterns of behaviour over 1 year, looking at 6-month intervals of an intervention of a program and then what happens over time.
In relation to animals?
No, this is in relation. I'm going back into humans now for my PhD.
But not exactly discrediting it, Sue.
Sorry, no, I'm
exactly
just. I'm just. Yeah.
I think you're actually building her credibility, if anything. But thank you.
Sorry, I'm not ashamed to hide my PhD. I'm doing my PhD in a global study. It's going to be one of the largest studies in the world based on shared book reading behaviours in parents and children. So I've moved away from animals and medical, and that's a decision I've taken on personal grounds too. Sometimes I think I've fought this fight. I've been in this panel before. I've sat in this room before. I've heard Minister Sharp agree with me and then throw everything I said out the door. And sometimes when you keep smashing your head against a brick wall trying to fight, showing that this is fundamentally flawed. If you don't fly there, you don't estimate. This is the University of St Andrews. It can get quite demoralising. So I'm doing my PhD in an area where I might be able to try and make a little bit of difference and get books into the hands of children. And I'm not ashamed to hide that.
Yeah, great questions.
Sorry, Miss Abigail Boyd, did you have any follow-up questions? Sorry, I know you didn't have...
I'm aware of your work in the macropod inquiry, and I know that was quite sort of groundbreaking, and really changed the hearts and minds of a lot of people on that inquiry. And I'm sorry that hasn't been acknowledged and the impact followed up on by Minister Sharp. I guess just coming back again to that question of that really good question from my colleague about, we know. Well, I personally accept the evidence you've given as being this methodology, this counting methodology has not been done to these particular standards as you've listed. The question about why are we thinking that the numbers have been overestimated rather than underestimated is a key one, and that's what I was trying to get at before with the. Is it that they thought they would see sort of 60 to 80 clusters and then just didn't? Or are we assuming that because that number of clusters wasn't seen, that's why the number must be lower? Or is it not that? Is it just that we just don't know?
I think the distance sampling is the significant question that we need to be looking at that methodology. If we look at that, so they saw 10 and 5 and add them together, when you don't see enough, and you add 2 years together. Basically, in 2014, the 10, 2019, the 5. When you add them together, you get one single time point at 2016. So roughly there's 8.5 at 2016. That's not a time projection. But how do we go from 1,748 to 23,500? This is in the distance sampling. It's not just in wild horses. In the kangaroos, they went from 508 to 300,000. This methodology, where they're not seeing sufficient animals, is in question. That's what I'm arguing. If we want the annual headcount from National Parks and Wildlife Service, we wanted to replicate, we wanted to do that, come back to the table, and I said in the meeting with Labor and National Parks, I can't remember who else was in the room, once those numbers come back, yes, I was open to modelling if you saw sufficient numbers of animals. Absolutely, I'd be open to that. But if you don't model. Same as in any work. If you don't meet those model assumptions, if I go to publish something and the statistical reviewer comes back to me and says, well, can you show me your raw data? Where are your model assumptions? I can't publish if I don't meet that.
So when we were talking about the Victorian experience,
Yep.
and we were saying that here, the latest numbers, we've got about a 10,000 variation and a 95% confidence of that 10,000 variation, which is quite wide. If we had... Oh, no, the question is, when the, I forget what it was called, Mark Recite, when that is used for counting in Victoria,
Yep.
What is their confidence level like then?
Much lower. I think I'd have to calculate it out myself, but I have the report here for what they have. Sorry, do I have to table this now I'm referring to it? I'm sorry.
You can if you'd like to.
I've emailed it to people about survey. So their confidence interval, they saw a population of 252. The estimated abundance of that, and their confidence interval was 196 to 349.
Let's go. Is your report on all the methodology critiques, has that been peer reviewed?
No, it's been reviewed by other statisticians, but not peer reviewed. I'm happy to put it out for peer review, but the problem is it's not my data. I didn't generate the data. I've used work from the University of St Andrews. This is the data that's put by National Parks and Stuart Cairns that we're just questioning the methodology over. And I'm happy to have it put out for under peer review. Well, I mean, the University of St Andrews peer reviewed the 2014-2019 work and critiqued it. Really, really ripped into it.
Could I ask, if a complete new survey
Yep.
using a method that you felt comfortable with was to be engaged now by National Parks and Wildlife Service, so that you had confidence in the number of horses, how long do you think it would take if the resources were provided to you and the expertise was provided to you? How long would it take to do the survey? How long would it take to generate the figures?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if we had 2 days flying time, the photographer needed 3 days and possibly a week. I would say you could do the entire project in 2 weeks.
You could have an accurate figure that you would have
Yep.
confidence in
Yes.
2 weeks.
Yes, that's correct.
So over the Christmas New Year break,
Yes.
there could be there could be a helicopter provided to you.
Yes.
You'd need 2 days helicopter time. Is that
Yeah, because when you're using Mark Rees in Victoria, you always do the same thing 2 days in a row, and you hope you get the same weather because if you need a day in between, but you'd need it done within 3 days. So if it's more than 2 days, say the first day's sunny and then it rains for 2 days, then you'd have to repeat day 1 or 2. You need 2 consecutive days flying all 48 hours apart. That's all you need.
Okay, so how long would you estimate the flying per day would be?
It was approximately 6 hours was what we put forward. Exactly what National Parks and Wildlife Service fly anyway, in the same chopper that they were flying. We were not changing anything they wanted.
Okay, so realistically, all you're asking for is 12 hours of National Parks and
Correct.
Wildlife helicopter.
That was correct.
And a photographer. Would you have a photographer available?
We had an independent photographer who's won an incredible amount of gold awards just this year on wildlife photography, but I would be open to having any photographer, video camera stuck on the bottom of the helicopter who has experience in photographing wildlife from helicopters. I want to make everything public. Well, not we, anyone. It's not about myself. It's trying to verify the numbers. That's what needs to happen.
But I mean, 12 hours of flying time in a squirrel, that'd be no more than about $3,000, $4,000 an hour. I mean, we're talking about, I guess, figures, around about the $40,000 mark for the whole total cost, so that you'd have confidence that the New South Wales public could have confidence in that, despite the extraordinary costs we're currently going through with the current cull.
I'm not aware of any of the costs with the current cull, but yes, I think when we put forward our plan, it was coming in around $35,000 was what would be needed, including analysis, and then we asked after it's done, we sit down again with 2 weeks and we have everyone in the room and look at the numbers and see what we've got.
How much do you think they spend on the current survey method?
I saw a figure of 115,000, but I'm not sure. I'd have to verify that. Do I say take that on notice? Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
absolutely. Take that one on notice. I am going to have to throw to the Honourable Bob.
Can I just ask one more question?
One more.
Sorry,
quickly.
the Victorian studies that the marker.
Yep.
Is all that data published?
Yeah, well, it'd be nice if we had each individual count, but what they've provided is they provide the number of observations that they record, the actual number of horses sighted, and the number of horses sighted on day 1, day 2, and the number of horses sighted once and twice. It's not done by exact location, but I'm sure, I don't know if we can get that.
It's a much more inclusive data set than what's provided by National Parks and Wildlife in New South Wales.
Yeah, look, in the 2022-23 reports, it's a table as simple as that. We're just asking for the number. It would be great if it was at each location, but...
Victoria's more transparent than we are. That's great.
The Honourable
Sorry,
Bob
I'm not-
Manver. You don't need to answer that. That was a statement. You don't need to say.
Thank you,
That's
Chair.
the Wes factor. It's
Okay, sure. All right, sorry.
Ms. Galea,
Yep.
apologies in advance for my very limited technical understanding of these issues. I know that'll come as a shock to the rest of the committee. I just wanted to clarify, just for my mind, is your concern more broadly with the distance sampling methodology in its entirety, or with its particular application on this occasion?
I would say it's with the entirety, because the application, the concerns in the application crosses over to macropods as well. So it's definitely been used in flawed methodologies multiple times.
So it's the methodology in its entirety,
Yes,
not the
that's
way
correct.
it's been applied
Yep.
on this occasion.
Yep.
Do you believe that statistical modelling can be used for these sorts of complex?
If you see sufficient numbers,
matters?
yes, that's my job. Statistician,
Right.
if I see sufficient numbers, then I model. That's what I do. And if you see the sufficient numbers across all the areas, and the other thing that I guess just to draw your attention to is how precise the surveys are. So when we do survey work, which is what I do, we have to reach a threshold of accuracy. There's times up where 83% of their surveys don't meet that level of accuracy. So it's not just the distance sampling, it's how accurate their surveys are. So if you've only got 17% accuracy, it's almost like forecasting the weather. Like, this is a bit of a concern. It is a great concern to me. As a statistician, your accuracy should be much higher than 17%.
So the issue that's confounding me at the moment is the fact that distance sampling is so widespread internationally
Yes,
as well.
it is. Yep.
It has been subject to thousands of peer-reviewed studies.
Yes, I agree.
And as I understand it, actual counts in some of those peer-reviewed studies have matched the statistical count using the distance sampling
Yes,
method.
you raise an excellent point.
Which would go to the accuracy of the methodology.
Now you're in trouble when she says you've raised an excellent point.
So-
She's going to cane you, mate.
Well, no, then I question, why does this not? If they saw 1,748 and the University of St Andrews ripped it apart and said, well, you know, your growth rates exceed, you can't model where you don't see, and it's difficult, this methodology, based on what you're doing. If the very people that designed the software have serious concerns with what Stuart Cairns is doing, why does it not match other peer-reviewed publications?
So it's not the methodology of distance sampling per se that is your
It's this one
concern.
there.
It is the way it's been
It's
applied
the
on this
way-
occasion.
Yeah.
Well, it's been not just on this occasion, because it's also being done with the macropods as well. So this very same modelling, this very same distance sampling modelling is used to derive the population estimates of macropods and their quotas as well, by the
So-
same person.
So the preferable approach that you've nominated for this scenario is the mark and recite model? Is that
Yeah,
right?
and imagery. Yeah, I think we should, mark recite is one, definitely, but I think we should also be using thermal imagery and RGB imagery as well.
Okay, so this committee has received other submissions
Yep.
from ecologists
Yep.
with experience in I suppose, controlling populations of animals. Are you aware of a Dawson and Miller review into the mark and recite model,
Yes.
which, as I understand
Don't
it,
have
says that it is a model that only works for small isolated
populations,
populations, not populations of potentially thousands.
Yeah,
of
that's
animals.
correct. But according to their numbers, we're not looking at thousands. The maximum number that they saw was 1,748. If we have mark recite and we have a photographer who can capture images between 7,000 to 8,000 within a 6-hour period, it would be more than sufficient to be able to be done. But I also, as I said, we need RGB and thermal imagery as well. Just provide everything. Let's be completely transparent. We only need 2 weeks to get it done.
In terms of the
Put your hand in your pocket,
application,
Bob.
in terms of the application
Yep.
of the recite model in
Yep.
Victoria,
Yep.
is that in a small isolated population?
It is
or-
in a smaller isolated population, but I could provide you so many publications where mark recite has been used on aquatic animals in much larger areas. Many examples. It's the gold standard for capturing imagery on wildlife. So I can provide you many examples if that would help.
Just a final question from
Yep.
me, just with respect to drones, thermal cameras.
Yes.
Again, not being an expert in the field,
No.
ecologists have suggested that before we can use those methods,
Yep.
there would need to be evidence published in recognised ecological journals to show that those methods work for the relevant species and habitat that you're trying to apply them to.
Yep.
And on this occasion, with respect to this issue that we're
Yep.
dealing with, that has not been the case, and they therefore don't recommend using it. What would your response be to that?
I can understand that and I go back to the same thing. If we have a photographer with the imagery plus the thermal imagery plus the RGB, we have it all done on the same helicopter or fixed wing, whichever it is, over 2 consecutive days. We provide all 3. We have all the evidence. All parties come to the table with everything we have.
Thank you. We have come to time, but I know that there's one
I've
more
just got
quick
one,
question
yeah.
from Mrs. Higgins. If you're happy to stay one more minute.
sure.
Yep, thank you.
Just on the basis, I'm just curious, with the assumption that, you know, we've only seen 1,000 or so animals, what do you say then is possible based on the proper application of a methodology not done by Stuart Cairns but done by the University of St Andrews?
Sure. Well, look, I mean, as I said, if they see sufficient animals of 60 to 80 clusters in individual areas, then we can investigate the modelling. But you certainly can't do it in any of these. In 2014, we wouldn't have been able to undertake any modelling at all. We could possibly, you can look in it where you see 60 to 80 clusters, but only in that one open area. And you cannot combine open and treed areas, which is now what they're doing, which makes less sense. So if we have separated open and treed across each of the 4 areas, so we have 8 different counts, then we look at the numbers within those counts and question the assumptions. What assumptions of that modelling do we meet and can we undertake it?
So just on that though, between September and December,
Yep.
there's actually been over 1,000 animals removed or culled. So how does that so are you suggesting then, based on what we have got, there won't be many horses in the park now?
Well, without the imagery, I can't say that. There's nothing to verify it. If they saw 1,748 and 1,000 have been removed, that certainly makes less than the 3,000 number that they were talking about. But I can't get 10 plus 5 to add to 60. So I'm not sure. Without, again, I just can't stress enough. We have nothing to verify what they're doing. And even when we asked them, please, can we just put a photographer up at any cost, it was rejected.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for coming to give evidence today. I hope that was fairly painless, but we thank you so much for your time and also for sharing your expertise. We really do appreciate it. I believe that there was some questions taken on notice, which the committee secretariat will be in contact with you, and there may be further questions from the committee, which they'll also be in contact with you about. So thank you again.